cape.
Welcome, Wargamers, to 2 Plus Tough. My name is Doug, and today we're diving into the Moonclan Grots. This is going to be very similar to my Skaven video, where the faction has not been released in terms of a new battle tome to give us updated AOS lore, but they are such a faction favorite, have been requested so many times by these folks here, that I just can't hold off any longer. I actually just went up and picked up a Moonclan Grot army of my own, and I'm very excited to dig into them. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Now, to clarify for you new folks here, what are the Moonclan Grots? Well, they used to be known as the Night Goblins. These were a kind of subspecies of goblin that worked in the Orcs and Goblins army back in Warhammer Fantasy Battles. Now, if you're not familiar, basically if you look at the destruction portion of the Games Workshop product line, most things in there were either Ogre Kingdoms or Orcs and Goblins, and so it was a massive faction with a ton of variety, and they kind of fractured it into a bunch of smaller ones. One of those being Moonclan Grots, which is all of the Night Goblin themed things. Now, as mentioned before, these were a subspecies of goblins that moved into the World's Edge Mountains back in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, basically for safety and security. They are small and feeble and easy to kill. And in there, they kind of found a new ecosystem. They were able to survive on cave fungus and all kinds of fauna and all kinds of weird stuff that was growing in there. They discovered a local animal in the caves called the squig, which is sort of a bipedal, very circular thing with a giant maw, and they were able to tame them, and not really tame them, they're pretty wild, but use them for tools effectively. And since they spent so much time in the cave, their skin actually became very weak against sunlight. They'll get burned very easily because they just can't handle the sun anymore. And so the night goblins would only really leave the caves at night on the darkest nights because even the moonlight made them uncomfortable. This is actually, if you've seen the model, why they always wear those big black cloaks and hoods. Now, they are busy in those caves, I guess reproducing or something, I don't know, there's just hundreds and thousands of these guys. When they leave the caves at night, it's like a flood coming from all the different cracks and crevices in the mountain range. So talking about what they are actually like as like characters like that, they're individually extremely weak, okay? Even the Skaven warlords are pretty brutal in one-to-one combat. Not so much for these guys, they're pretty bottom of the barrel when it comes to physical prowess. Their society, their religion, their medicine, technology, it's all based around mushrooms, basically cave fungus, things they find in their natural environment. And most of the time they just kind of squabble amongst themselves, but every once in a while a leader will kind of rise with a vision to go do a raid, steal some supplies from a human or chaos encampment, and he'll, by brute force, or he'll drug everyone to basically have delusions of grandeur, and he'll just round up all of these night goblins to follow him. And when they go out to war, they fight as a fanatical mob. There's lots of screaming, leering, spitefulness, just curses, everything out there. They just go absolutely insane. If we're comparing these to the Skaven, which I think there's a lot of comparisons to make, Skaven actually have a lot more of a societal structure. They have the different clans, they have leaders of those clans, they have different hierarchies in terms of slaves versus free peoples, free Skaven I should say. These guys are very much more loose, very feral, wild, those kinds of things. Not a lot of structure going on, which befits a destruction army, I would say. And one of the main reasons they would go to war is basically just to get resources, those cloth and things like that, anything that doesn't grow naturally inside the cave. So they want like wood, metals, cloth, those kinds of resources, food. Now, transitioning into AOS, it kind of is a lore tweak. Really, the main pieces of lore we have are the small section in the Destruction book, as well as a Malign Portent story. And we'll get to both of those. In the booklet, they're kind of given a unique, cool backstory. As with all Destruction armies, they seem to have this great, grandiose kind of mythos when it comes to Gorka Morka, and they are no different. Beyond that, they're very much the same. They have an affinity for the mushrooms. This backstory just adds a little bit of cool depth to them, and that is basically that Gorka Mork was rampaging around the realms. This is when Gork and Mork are kind of combined into their singular form, and he's drinking oceans and smashing mountains and all these great, grandiose, mythological things, and then he sees the largest moon in the sky. Okay, the largest moon he's ever seen. They're not really told what realm it is. We're assuming beasts, but that's not necessarily true. And so he climbs up a huge mountain range, reaches and tries to grab the moon and bite into it, but the moon is too hard and it breaks his teeth as he's trying to chomp down into it. The shards of teeth fall and form large, cavernous, sharp, razor-edge mountains of their own, and that provides the home of the Moonclan Grots. That is their I don't know, mythos surrounding the mountains that give them shelter and all those things like that. Now, this story adds a religious context for mountain ranges where they would find themselves. As we've seen with other factions like Bone Splitters, not Ironjaws per se, but Beastclaw as well, they're giving this more kind of wild, untamed, almost religious connotation, certainly a reverence to Gorka Morka in a religious tone, and this is no different. It keeps up with that theme. And it doubles down with him as being a deity, rather than kind of this like random god who just kind of roamed the earth at some point and caused a bunch of destruction. In the future, when they do get a battle tome, I wouldn't be surprised if they worked alongside Gordrak as he went to free mountain ranges from controls of things like fortresses that Chaos and Order have built into the mountain ranges, because they, the Moonclan Grots, would see this as a freeing of their religious sites. So that's definitely like, whenever I think about a destruction army, I think about how they will relate to Gordrak, who's supposed to be the bringer of the Great Wall. And this is definitely one where I could see them working alongside of him. Now there is one more piece of lore, and it is from a malign portent story, which I'll put in the notes down below, called The Paradise Below. And in this one, we meet a Moonclan Grot, who is the war boss for a Moonclan Grot army called the Black Worm. The Black Worm is traveling along with a larger Orc warband, and when the Orcs get bored, they beat up the Grots for fun, which is kind of how it was in Warhammer Fantasy Battles as well. As this war boss is kind of bemoaning the fact that his friends are getting beat up for entertainment, a fungoid cave shaman, who is the malign portent's interpreter, I guess you would say, for that campaign series appears, comes out of a portal and sneaks up behind the war boss and tries to recruit him for an army. Right? He says, "Oh, I want the Black Worm to fight alongside me." War boss is basically like, "Why wasn't it for me?" Fungoid cave shaman gives him a really potent mushroom and basically sends him on a half fortune-seeing, half psychedelic trip that allows him to gain vision of kind of a potential future, is what I would say, where this little war boss of the Black Worm is leading a massive, unimaginably huge Moonclan Grot army, and they're conquering the realm of death itself. And when he wakes up from that stupor, the shaman says, "Are you with me? Are you coming with me?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, let's go do it. Let's go conquer the realm of death." And so they go through a huge portal. It dumps them out onto an already existing battlefield where the fight is already raging, and the war boss looks to the left and looks to the right and sees that there's other Moonclan Grot armies that were already recruited, and so he's not special. And there's Orc armies and all these destruction forces that are being brought to this place in the realm of death. He turns to look at the shaman and says, "What are you doing? Like, you told me I was going to be a king here and I was going to destroy this." And the shaman's like, "Maybe you will, maybe you won't. We'll just have to see." And then he goes back to the portal, closes it. So he basically ditches all these Moonclan Grots, like this whole army of them in the realm of death, and says, like, "Go conquer." And so apparently other shaman are doing the same thing, dumping various destruction armies in Shyish all over the place. So that is really, I think, the catalyst for a lot of the destruction armies to be in malign portents. And it's certainly cool. It definitely gives the backstabbing nature of the faction, as well as their use of mushrooms and how you can manipulate potential futures and what people see. I really like that story. It was pretty cool. Go read it. I didn't spoil everything. Ending's pretty great. But talking about why this army is important, I always want to hit this note really hard with these armies that haven't been released yet. And another thing is, like, just like Skaven, this is an extremely iconic army to the Warhammer Fantasy / Warhammer Age of Sigmar kind of mythos. They have the robes, the squigs, they're like the squig riders, who have these very manic, insane things, the fanatics. People recognize this as their IP for GW. Also, up to this point, we've only really seen kind of the smashing, brutal aspects of Gorka Morka, right? The Bone Splitters, the Ironjaws, the Beastclaw Raiders, but this army really represents the cunning side, right? Mork. Cunning but brutal. If you're not familiar, if you're new, Gork and Mork are two separate deities that fuse into one. Gork is brutal and cunning, Mork is cunning and brutal. And so what these guys are is the kind of like trap setters, deeper plans, machinations, those kinds of things. And I really love that army aspect. I think they're important because they give us a much fuller picture of Gork and Mork / Gorka Morka as a deity, and I think that we definitely need that going forward. And just in terms of adding things to kind of the setting, they're an extremely fun part of the narrative. They're very zany, very wacky. That's actually why I picked them up, is they're just strange. You know, they're all hopped up on mushrooms. They have delusions of grandeur. They're very much like Skaven in terms of being wacky and horde-based and things like that. But they have a very different tone to them. They talk differently, they act differently, and they want different goals in the end. I don't think it's all about conquering the realms like it is for Skaven. I think these guys are much more content just having their slice and proving that they're bigger and badder than the orcs. And I think that makes them very fun. You want to root for them in their stories just because of how, frankly, pathetic they individually are. And I want to end this discussion talking about what I'd like to see in a battle tome for them. Now, truth be told, there's a lot of rumors flying around that their battle tome is going to be coming out by the end of the year, simply because the other two malign portents characters, the Ordinator and the Knight of Shrouds, both got their armies released, so people are like, oh, clearly there's going to be a Dark Oath book and a Moonclan Grots book. Not confirmed, but not outside the realm of possibility. So as far as what I'd like to see, I want them to do something fun, like using the phases of the moon. The moon is a very important religious part of their history because Gorkamorka tried to eat the moon. They have this thing called the Bad Moon, which is, you see that little crooked, evil-looking moon and all their shields and things like that. I want to see, maybe we can do something like the Daughters of Cain, where they have a turn-based thing as the moon kind of comes up, crests, and ebbs. I don't want that mechanic to be used too often, like too much, so I don't want it to get boring. At the same time, I think it'd be pretty cool to have something to do with phases of the moon, and the Bad Moon particularly. As far as how they play, they are pretty puny, and I think something that would be very thematic is having a lot of debuffs in the army. A lot of spells and abilities that you can target an enemy unit and makes them worse at something. -1s to hit, to wound, you know, movement, those kinds of things. And the reason is because it feels very Mork, right, cunning and brutal, to bring people down to your level, right? They're never going to be the biggest guys. They're never going to hit like a ton of trains. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have the physical prowess to do those things, but they can surely be tricksy and mean and brutal and bring you down to their level. And I think that would be very thematic. Given how they're described in the old world, with crawling out of caves and subterranean tunnels that you didn't even know existed and surrounding the enemy, an alternate deployment mechanic would not be out of the realm of possibility. So just being able to say, like, you know, you can put a unit or two in tunnels and they'll pop up to the ground. Something similar to, say, like the Edeneth Deepkin have that one hero that allows you to take a unit or two off to the side and then deploy them first turn. That kind of stuff would not be too crazy, I don't think. What I really want is for them to be painted as zealots. See, it seems like there are a lot of religious connotations in this game, and I would love it if they were the religious zealots for Gorkamorka, right? We'll say the devoted of Sigmar, but for Gork and Mork, I think would be incredibly fun. Lastly, I want the mushroom thing, the theme of mushrooms, to become a bigger mechanic in their army. And I think that the risk and reward ratio needs to be kind of the limiting factor for that, meaning you could do even crazy stuff like gain +1's command point, because we know command points are coming, but take D3 mortal wounds. Well, when every character has 4 wounds, that actually means something. And so, you know what I mean? 4 wounds and a 5-up armor save, right? That's what we got. So that kind of stuff, I think that could be very thematic. Don't hold me to the command point thing. It's still a mechanic we don't know everything about at this point of recording, but you can do like reroll casting rolls. Like I said, it's just a strong risk and reward system that would really bring that part of their lore to the tabletop. And it's not hard to make the risks big when everyone has 4 wounds, and so in terms of leaders. And so I think that would be a great thing to see. But that is enough about me, friends. What do you look forward to seeing in the Moonclan Grots? What is your favorite part of their lore? I know Scarsnake was a huge leader, and people really miss seeing him around, but I think there's going to be great stories and leaders still to come. Thank you to everyone who requested to see this video. If you have an Age of Sigmar lore question you would like answered, go ahead, click subscribe, and leave it in the comments down below. And I look forward to seeing you in my next AOS lore video. Thanks so much for watching, and happy wargaming. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed that video, and I want to introduce you to some awesome folks. These are my patrons over on Patreon, and they make this show possible by their direct support of me to buy battle tomes and Black Library books and all the material I need and the hardware support that I need to make this stuff possible. And if you'd like to join them, go ahead and click over to the Patreon page, to the link in the description down below, and you'll be introduced to a really awesome community of people talking about the hobby, sharing what they're painting. I invite them to be part of polls to decide what content comes next. I raffle off every battle tome that I review, and we're having some great fun and discussions over there. So go ahead and check it out. Now, if you can't support in that way, that's completely fine. I'm just so glad that you watched this video here today. And if you have an Age of Sigmar lore question, go ahead and click subscribe and leave it in the comments down below. I read every single question and comment. I respond to as many as I possibly can, but I use them all as inspiration for future videos. So go ahead and do that now. And I look forward to seeing you guys on my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.